Well, so this calls to mind a whole other issue, I think, which is, so for example, with cabs. If I wanted to run a cab business here in Tampa a few years ago, I would have had to go to the city and buy medallions at great cost and get licensed and all the jazz. And then someone invented Uber and said, well, to heck with that. We don't need any of those regulations. Just let's put a network together. It's all to all, and the peer-to-peer will work out, and I'll get a car when I call one. It sounds to me like there may be some pressure on startups to sort of do an end run around the whole regulatory system. If you can give me an iPhone app where I sort of swab my cheek and get a full panel on my chromosomes on the spot, what does the FDA have to say about that? I mean, is that the future that we're headed to? Pat, what do you think?
I think there are a lot of companies, especially in the stem cell arena, that have gone offshore to do exactly what you're saying. And it all comes down to one little change of wording that happened, I forget now, several years ago at the USDA and how they regulate cell therapies. They put in minimally manipulate. So we were talking about this earlier. If I want to give you my kidney, I can do that. I might have some kind of disease that they can't detect, but the FDA doesn't regulate that. But because I'm taking my own tumor cells and minimally manipulating them by putting in a bacterial gene, even though it's only going to go back into me, they're now claiming that as the thing. And so they regulate that. So there's a fine line in how do you define minimally manipulate? Okay,
so we as a society have decided to sort of hold up on high this notion of the human germline, right? That we're very, very careful, very, very cautious about editing the human genome. And if that's going into a cancer cell and turning off this or that gene that prevents angiogenesis or what have you, it's still very scary, right, to us as a society that, well, you might release a virus that knows how to attack your tumor cell, but then it might attack my gallbladder, and what if that gets released? and then we have kids, and it's all part of the germline from then on. And which calls to mind CRISPR. Okay, CRISPR, a sort of do-it-yourself, very quick and dirty, very easy gene editing tool. What are the ramifications of CRISPR, Tracy? Laughter is the ramifications of CRISPR.
Well, I mean, anything like that, when you give someone, you have even in the wearable market, you have a whole bunch of do-it-yourselfers that want to do things like that. They want to add body parts, or they want to do, put it in RFID chips. So when you start getting people the ability to edit their own DNA, there's all kinds of things that could happen with that. But I was actually just reading an article that we were talking about earlier, and I don't have the full details of it, but there's some potential patent disputes about some of the CRISPR stuff.
Yeah, so apparently there's a patent holder who's going to block use of CRISPR. Is that likely?
That's what I saw,
fees?
But that might be different. But I mean, so what happens is, what I think what that does is it starts to put it back in our hands. And one of the things that people don't sometimes understand about the medical industry is that the patient isn't really part of it. And that sounds really weird. But when you start looking at one of the fundamental problems of healthcare is that you go to a doctor, and that doctor is paid by your insurance company. And so then the doctor has to keep your insurance company happy, not you. And this is one of those things.
But you have just identified one of the issues that modern society is facing with the advent of the internet and the widespread use of technology. Right there in that comment, which is if the last 10 or 15 years have been about anything, it's been about the democratization of access. Okay, I as a lawyer, for example, am the guy you have to come to if you want to get certain legal things done. But there's LegalZoom and there's Rocket Lawyer, and there are alternatives now. You don't necessarily need to. But if I want a prescription, if I want a strong enough painkiller, I've got to go to the system. I've got to kneel at the feet of my doctor, and I've got to get permission to medicate myself.
Right.
And what I think we're talking about with CRISPR and some of these other technologies is that we may be doing an end run around the establishment, and that's both good and bad, right? Because if I get in a cab and he's a jerk, then okay, I've had a bad cab ride. But if I self-medicate, well, I'm dead. Or I've changed the human germline in some, or I've caused disease. Pat, what do you think?
Well, I think one thing that we're missing here is personal responsibility. And I think that to a large extent that's been taken out of our hands. Right now today, if I want to try some experimental technology, if I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer, basically I'm not in charge of what I can do.
You can't do it, right?
I can't make my own choices of what I want for me. And to me, that's the extreme of the regulatory.
Now, is that all the insurance? Is that all just because the provider won't cover it? What if you're independently wealthy?
No, it's like, okay, if I had cancer, my first thought would be, I want to do our technology that we're developing. Legally,
that's a testament right there.
and well, I might go downstairs to the lab. I didn't say that, but really, the FDA will not allow me to do that. I can't do that. I can't make that decision for myself. So we've taken all the control of our personal health away by having all of these regulatory statutes and the implementation of the statutes. And so I think that's one extreme, but at the same time, if you have a drug that can be given to millions and millions of people, that's a real issue that should be regulated. So we've got to find some kind of happy medium so we don't have to go to the Bahamas, we don't have to go to Mexico, we can actually make choices.
So that's another great issue, and I think this is one that we can perhaps begin to wrap up on, because I've just been told we have about 5 minutes. 5 minutes and then questions. Thank you very much. So, as with many other areas, the rock on this planet on which you are standing dictates what you may and may not do because of a thing called jurisdiction. And so within the United States, on this particular rock we call the United States of America, you are not allowed to do many of the things that you are allowed to do on other rocks, whether that rock is called Mexico or Singapore or the Bahamas or what have you. To what extent is the forefront of medtech going offshore just to take advantage of the looser regulatory environment? And is that good for society? Or are we doing it right in the United States by being more hesitant?
Medical tourism is a huge industry.
It's huge, yes. Which means I can go to China or I can go to India and I can say, a better nose, please, and also another spleen. And while you're at it, I'd like to be an inch taller. Right?
Yeah, there's medical tourism, there's other things, even human trials. I could take a same human trial that I could do in the United States, I could take it to China, and instead of it being operated by nurses and physician assistants here, it would be completely run by doctors over there for the same cost. And I would have an exact patient population and everything else like that. So my overall
cost... So that sounds like you're getting better quality service.
It would, some would say, but it wouldn't be necessarily accepted in the United States.
Huh.
And so there's a lot of things like that where you look at the global environment that we live in right now, that moving technology forward needs to happen, and it's kind of happening anyways. The question is trying to make sure that the United States keeps moving through the forefront of that, and it helps enabling companies to be able to bring innovations out. And especially like what she was saying about personalized medicine, when you start dealing with a smaller population of people who could potentially benefit from something, you need something that can actually measure that. And one of the reasons we actually built Bioscanner was because I got frustrated with the fact that it took 2 weeks to a month to get results back from tests to see if there was an effect. And so when you're looking at, we want to be able to test things, we want to be able to test things rapidly and see if there's a change within minutes, hours, days, not months, weeks, years.
Understood. No, we've all been frustrated by the fact that you go in and you take the test and then they never call, or they call 2 weeks later. And so Pat, let's finish with you. Do we in the United States, are we running the risk that the forefront of medical technology is going to occur offshore? And that simply because our laws are, as you say, centuries old, and unable to permit the kind of research and the kind of testing that needs to take place in order to keep up with modern technology?
Well, I wouldn't say that's happened yet, but I think it could very well happen, and it is happening in some areas already. Okay.
Well, with that, I would like to thank both of you very much for I'm sure we could go on for hours with the high energy here. So let's take it to the audience for questions. Got a very, very fertile set of brains on the stage, at least to my left, anyway. Any questions about medicine? Yeah. So he wants to start a company to do something crazy. Where should he go? Where does he move to?
I don't know if it's the countries that are the least strict. You have to look at the right balance, where they have a good developed medical infrastructure, and regulatory testing.
Because you could go to Tuvalu, but
yeah, you could go to some countries where there's nothing. When you're looking at it though, it's trying to find the right match of a large patient population. Also, if you have, the one thing to come back on the other side of that is that between the NIH and other regulatory funding agencies. The government does fund a lot of this medical research, which is why there is a lot of it here. So it's not like the government isn't stepping up to do a lot of these things. It's just the large cost of it is caused by the regulation that they have to pay for. So
it's good that they're stepping in then.
Yeah, they are stepping in there. So it's also trying to find, countries that would be interested in doing some of that funding too, that are interested in moving it. Dubai actually is doing huge breakthroughs right now in medical, some medical conferences and stuff going in there, because I think they're pushing about $300 billion into medicine and stuff like that, and development, and bringing companies and stuff in. They're just really playing very heavy.
Things are going to happen whether we're part of it or not. Pat, if you got shut down today, if the regulators marched into your office and said, can't do this here, where would you go?
Somewhere. I'll find somewhere. Yep, I would.
Okay.
I think if you want to keep going and you want to continue to think outside the box, because that's where these innovations, that's where it's going to come. It's not going to come from drug companies that found this out a long time ago. They're licensing in their technologies from smaller companies who are innovative. They're not bogged down by the bureaucracy.
Because by definition, innovation is weird. It doesn't come from the normal. It doesn't come from the expected. It comes from the crazy. That's where we get the new stuff, right? So the regulators have a hard time dealing with the crazy.
They do, but I think, to their credit, the FDA, especially in the immuno-oncology area, are trying to help. The length of trials are being shortened, because in some of these, like pancreatic cancer, why do a 5,000 person trial? It's not necessary. There's nothing that will treat it. You go out, you do your best shot, and it gives them something. So where it was 10, 15 years ago, and $1.5 billion to get something through the system, some of these checkpoint inhibitors are like 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, because it's not the normal phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They're more integrated. So you can then add to your submission, say, I want to try this therapy in combination with this, and you can do that without going back to the drawing board.
Which maybe integrates with one of your earlier comments, which is, find something that's working and sort of glom onto it. But another flavor of the question, I think, is maybe I'm not an entrepreneur, maybe I'm a patient. Maybe I've been told this afternoon that I've got pancreatic cancer, or I've got some other terminal condition. What do I do? Because as you said earlier, I'm not in charge of this. Somebody else is. Do I get on a plane and go to Singapore? Am I Charlie Sheen? Do I go to Mexico and stay at a resort? What is the patient to do in view of all this?
We get a lot of calls from people all over the country. They're desperate. Their doctors have told them they can't really do anything, or they have to do this terrible thing that will give them 4 months maybe of quality of life. Okay, so they're looking. They have the internet now. You mentioned that before. They can go Google things, and they find us, and it puts us in a really difficult position, saying, I would love to help you. Our whole thing is to end needless suffering, and so we get a great charge out of helping animals, but we can't help people, and so it's really frustrating. So I go on the internet, I try to find a clinical trial of somebody else that's trying to do something innovative, and I try to steer them that way, but it's really frustrating.
Wow.
Well, and then the thing is that you're just doing Google. There's no validation of anything out there. There's no regulation, and you have third world country. You might have some
sure, you might have a quack. I get it. Yeah, it's tough.
Lack of a better term, yeah. Or something that's there. There are so many things out there. And then there's so many of those things that people have gotten results from. When you start getting into the placebo effect and other things like that, where you go, there's no way that possibly could have worked, but that person's in a full remission now. And you start going, okay, but how does that work, and how do you know? And that's the other side of this, is that our regulatory bodies keep us safe, but
we do the best we can with evidence.
And they are trying hard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Maybe if we can just compress that somewhat. Let's move on over here, if I may.
So you brought up the challenge of being in Tampa and not having the investor base that you like. Is there an equivalent of like a Kickstarter to get micro money from a bunch of people who have big investors?
So I'm starting a company here in Tampa. I know it's going to be 5, 6, 8, 10 years through clinical trials before I'm making $1. What are there sites? Do people do biotech on Kickstarter or GoFundMe, or are there other specialized sites for this kind of thing?
There are a couple of groups in Tampa that do that. The money's not very big, and it's very specialized, and it's not specifically geared toward biotech, but there are small monies to be found. I will say that yes, we can get grant money for all the laboratory work, and then you have to raise big money for the clinical trials, but there's also this valley of death where it's difficult to get anything from anybody because that's where the risk is really. We try to mitigate that risk by doing so many studies in large animals, but that is a huge risk. The SEC has come out with some new guidelines that are about to go into effect where it opens up the ability to raise money from
the general public.
The general public,
yeah. Because with Kickstarter and GoFundMe, you're not actually selling stock to anybody. You're just giving them a hat or something, and they're basically gifting you the money. But yeah, now it's becoming more possible with still some regulation. There's still plenty of, but it's more to go out to the general public and say, hey, send me 10 grand, send me $1,000, send me $500, and I'll give you some stock in my company. Literally, in ancient days, 5 years ago, we would have said, that's a public offering, and you can't do that without filing an S1 with the SEC. But nowadays, there are ways to do that to a limited degree.
Right. So, so the Jobs Act, I think, is really opening it up. And I'm not sure that many biotech companies have made advances into that, but I know there are some. And that may be the way of the future to get money because you still have to have some kind of accreditation for investors, some process.
They have to be wealthy. They have to be rich enough to lose the money and not lose their house.
But I don't think the company that's soliciting funds has to go now into such depth of making sure that investor is accredited.
It's a little easier.
So that's loosening up. So instead of going to the Tampa Bay community here one-on-one when I get an introduction, I'll be going to millions of people that may not give me $100,000 at a time. If they give me $10,000 at a time, I still have got my audience. And I think that is about to take off. It's not there yet, but I think it will.
So that may backfill, or at least get us through some of the the valley of death, as you say. Now,
but there's a backlash for that because right now most biotech companies, they get a level of validation from venture capital who do have to do some kind of diligence. So there's no validation step in doing this type of funding.
No,
so that's something that you would have to weigh.
If you get funded in an online offering, what you're basically telling the rest of the world is, I made a good video.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
If you get funded by an institutional venture capitalist who is in the business of funding biotech companies, you're basically saying these people who are really smart and expect to make lots of money and know how to do that well have looked at me and said, yes, I have in fact developed a machine where if you put a dollar bill in here, you'll pull a $100 bill out in a few years.
Right.
Is there room in the marketplace for more people who are more patient with their money? It's a fund that can throw $1 million, $3 million, $10 million at a startup and not see a return for 10 years, because that's a lot to ask, right? I mean, that's a lot to ask.
Isn't that the way it used to be?
Yeah.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
So this is this really,
before the internet, that's how it was done. Yeah.
This is the way things were done, and things did take time.
When venture capital was venturous.
Right.
when there was venture in venture capital.
Not
back in my day, we took risks.
No, but there's other things like so one of the things we're actually looking at is contracts. So we're actually taking, pieces or incremental parts of some of our technology to be able to help other companies, and so we can actually not necessarily sell off that technology, but be able to provide solutions. So that brings revenue in as we're building some of our larger solutions.
All right. Well, I think Pat said it best, which is that if you, no disrespect, Tracy, that if the people to my left on this stage, their job is to end or reduce suffering. And there can be truly no greater calling. It bears the very mantle of what it means to be human. So thank you both very much for participating on this panel, and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. It's our pleasure.